In Australia in 1893, there was a financial crisis that was caused by a speculative boom in the housing market. It caused a number of banks to suspend operations, causing economic hardship even for those who seemed to be financially secure. One of those people was Henry Oxley, a businessman who had a personal wealth of £1,300, which would be around 250,000 to 300,000 Australian dollars today. It was in early 1893 that Henry and his family moved to Adelaide to purchase a fruiterer business and expand his growing wealth. After arriving in the area, he put all of his money into Commercial Bank, which suspended operations a week later. With all his money tied up in the bank, he believed that income from his new fruit business would sustain them, so he used his last bit of cash to close the sale, purchasing a horse and carriage plus the services of the former owner for a week to introduce him to current customers. The sale was finalized a week before Christmas of that year, and it didn't take long for Henry to realize that he had made a mistake. It turned out that the profits from the business were much smaller than claimed. Henry told his family that he had been swindled and that he was a ruined man. People who knew him said he became despondent. He was technically a rich man by the standards of the day, but by Christmas of 1893 he had gotten himself into a position where he was unable to support his family. On Christmas Eve, Henry lent his horse and carriage to a group of carolers who were spreading cheer throughout the neighborhood. They returned the carriage in the early morning hours of Christmas Day, and they stood out in Henry's front yard and chatted until about 5 o'clock. December is summertime in Australia since it's in the southern hemisphere, and historical records say the temperature had a low of 17.8 degrees Celsius, which would be about 65 degrees Fahrenheit, so it would have been pretty comfortable. The carolers knew Henry as a friendly guy who had been married to his wife Emma for 11 years. They had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, and as the man walked back into his house on Sturt Street in the heart of Adelaide, they never could have imagined it would be the last time they'd see him or his family. Only a few hours later at 7:30 a.m., a man who took care of Henry's horse arrived at the house and found it awfully quiet for a house full of children on a Christmas morning. The man called out to Henry a few times and didn't get an answer, so he went in the house to find him. First, he went into their son's room and found the boy laying on his side with a gash in his head so large his brain matter was visible. The walls and surrounding area were spattered with blood. The man rushed into the other room where Henry and Emma were both laying in bed. Emma had a gash to her head just as bad as their son. Henry was in bed next to his wife with a razor in his hand and a fatal cut to his own neck. On another bed in that room, their daughters were laying together, both with serious wounds to their heads, but luckily they were still alive. The man raced to notify the police and the girls were taken to the hospital, but they both died soon after arriving. Police found a tomahawk on the floor of the Oxley's bedroom, and it was clear that that was the weapon Henry used to kill his family before taking his own life with the razor. It's believed that Henry was too ashamed for his family to find out about his financial failure, and authorities said that he committed the murder-suicide in a state of insanity. Henry Oxley chose Christmas Day to murder his entire family, a day that's supposed to be filled with joy amongst loved ones. Despite the image of happiness and festivity that Christmas often generates, it's not always that way for many people. Though the idea that suicide rates increase around the holidays is actually a myth, it still causes a lot of stress, which can present itself in a number of negative ways, including murder. Henry Oxley allowed his stress to make him believe a Christmas murder was the only way out of his situation, and it's just the first in this list of 5 Christmas-time murders. No list of crimes is ever complete without an entry from our favorite crazy state, Florida, so we'll get that out of the way first. On Friday, December 2nd, 2011, Michelle O'Dowd failed to show up for work at the business that her twin brother owned. Phil Axt said that it was unlike his sister to just not show up, so he went to her apartment in Jacksonville, Florida to check on her. When he arrived, the door was open and the house was ransacked. Her car was still outside, so Phil started looking for his sister amongst the mess when he saw a foot sticking out from under the Christmas tree. Under a pile of presents, he found Michelle, covered with blood with a towel over her face. Her skin was cold. When police began investigating, they quickly learned that Michelle had been on the phone earlier that day, and the relative who had talked to her said she wasn't alone in her apartment. Patty White had dated Michelle's nephew, and after they broke up, she remained close with his family. Phil said that Patty just couldn't keep a job and her life was a mess, but his family did what they could to help her out. That included Michelle letting her crash at her apartment when Patty needed a place to live. While living together, Patty knew the code to the gated community that Michelle lived in, and Michelle had given her the PIN to her debit card so she could buy groceries. Eventually, the living arrangement became unpleasant, and Michelle asked Patty to move out. Patty returned to South Carolina where she stayed with relatives, but she drove back to Jacksonville at the beginning of December with the plan of robbing Michelle. There was a fight, and Patty ended up beating Michelle before strangling her to death. Then she hid the body under a pile of presents, ransacked the house to make it look like a robbery, but only took Michelle's debit card. She then used the card multiple times to withdraw $1,000 from ATMs. Then she returned to South Carolina. She was easily connected to the crime as she was on camera at both ATMs when she withdrew the cash. Patty was pulled over, arrested, and extradited back to Florida where she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 45 years in prison, so at least she has a place to live now. Back in Australia, a drug-fueled plan between friends was the cause of another murder on Christmas Day in 2013. Danielle Kerr had lived with a man named William Stevenson in Kerrang, a rural town in northern Victoria near the border with New South Wales. Danielle would later admit to being a regular crystal meth user, and after getting into a fight with her roommate, she came up with a plan to murder him. She was supposed to pick William up from work, but never showed up, and that made William upset. Understandably. Because of that, she told her friend and fellow drug addict Damian Lewis that she wanted to kill Bill, which Damian later testified that she laughed about because it was the name of a movie. She made the plan to take William out to a remote area and kill him, if for no other reason than she wanted to know what it would feel like to kill someone. On Christmas Day, Danielle and Damian picked William up from the house he had gone to after work, since she never picked him up, and they began driving south to Bendigo. Eventually, they stopped in a remote area in Kamarooka. Outside of the car, Danielle bashed William in the head with a rock before stabbing him in the neck. As he laid on the ground pleading for his life, Danielle beat him with a tree branch until he was dead. Then Damian helped her load William's body into a car and they lit it on fire. It's unclear whose car was burned and how Danielle and Damian left the area, but William was reported missing after not showing up for work for 2 days. The burnt car was found on January 1st by a police officer, and the hunting knife used in the attack was later found by divers in a nearby lake. Danielle and Damian were quickly arrested and they denied any involvement in the murder. Danielle initially claimed it was all carried out by Damian. Damian eventually opened up about the entire plan, and a judge would later say that his story sounded more credible. Danielle ended up pleading guilty to the murder of William Stevenson and was sentenced to 21 years in prison. Damian also pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 10 years for his involvement. During the Christmas of 1992, a group of 4 young people calling themselves the Downtown Posse carried out a string of robberies and murders. The ringleader was a 19-year-old named Marvellus Keene, and he was joined by 20-year-old Heather Matthews, 17-year-old DeMarcus Smith, and 16-year-old Laura Taylor. Their crime spree started on December 24th and lasted 3 days across Dayton, Ohio. Their first victim was a man named Joseph Wilkerson, who Marvellus, Heather, and Laura convinced they wanted to have an orgy with. Once they were all in Joseph's bedroom, the three criminals tied him up and searched his apartment for valuables. They found a .32 caliber Derringer, which Marvellus used to shoot Joseph in the chest multiple times. Then Laura shot the man in the head, likely with a different weapon. They stole his car and fled the scene. Those three met up with DeMarcus, and it's reported that each member of the group was armed. They saw Danita Galetta on a payphone and they killed her, taking her shoes and jacket. They headed back to Joseph's house, planning to stay the night there, but on their way they attacked Jeffrey Wright. He was shot multiple times in the legs but was able to escape into a neighbor's house. The next morning, Marvellus took Joseph's second vehicle, which they used to tail Laura. She had lured her ex-boyfriend, Richmond Maddox, out of his mother's house and they were driving in his car. He eventually noticed that they were being followed, so he sped up. That's when Laura pulled out the Derringer and shot Richmond in the head, killing him. She jumped from the car before it crashed and hopped into the car with her accomplices. It's unclear where the group slept that night, but the following morning they robbed a woman named Kathy Henderson and stole her car. They drove that car to a grocery store that they intended to rob. Laura entered the store first to case the joint, then she reported back to the others that there were only a few people in the store at the time. Sarah Abraham, whose family owned the store, and Edward Thompson, who was a shop helper. At some point, a customer entered the store, but it's not clear how long they had been in there. Marvellus and DeMarcus entered the shop and demanded money from the register. Once Sarah handed over the cash, Marvellus shot her in the head, killing her. At the same time, DeMarcus shot at both Edward and the customer, Jones Pettis. The bullet missed Edward, but Jones was hit in the abdomen. He survived his wound. By that point, the gang was afraid that their friends might snitch on them. They had two friends who knew about their crime spree, 18-year-old Marvin Washington and 16-year-old Wendy Cottrell. They lured the two out and drove them to a gravel pit where they were executed by Marvellus and DeMarcus. After a police officer saw the group acting suspiciously at some point after the murders of Marvin and Wendy, he followed them back to their friend's house, but the killers realized the officer was there. As they got to the house, DeMarcus fled out of the car and the other three were arrested. DeMarcus was apprehended soon after. Marvellus Keene and Heather Matthews were adults at the time and were charged as such. Marvellus was charged with 5 murders plus 15 other charges including attempted murder, aggravated robbery, and burglary. Not having been the one who shot Richmond Maddox, it was the only murder he was not charged with. He opted for a bench trial carried out before a panel of 3 judges who found him guilty on all counts and sentenced him to death. Heather took a plea deal and she was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms with parole eligibility after 53 years each. So she basically will never be released. The juveniles were both sentenced to multiple life sentences, also not being eligible for parole for over 100 years. Marvellus Keene was executed by lethal injection on July 21, 2009. The final case in this list not only has the unfortunate distinction of happening during the Christmas season, but it coincidentally happened in a city called Santa Claus. Now, you're probably expecting the place to be in northern Canada or Scandinavia, someplace that could be close to the North Pole. But no, Santa Claus is in the southern U.S. state of Georgia. Because, why not? There, Danny Daniels and his wife Kim lived with their 4 children, Jessica and Bryant, plus 2 others that weren't identified since they survived the incident. The couple also gave back to the community by acting as a foster family to a number of children, and in December of 1997, they had 3 children living with them. Joanne Heidler had been one of their foster children, and though she was no longer living there, her brother Jerry Heidler was familiar with the family. When 20-year-old Jerry started a relationship with 16-year-old Jessica, Danny was not happy and he told Jerry as much, causing the young man to stop coming by the house. A personal tragedy in Jerry's life caused him to break down, and in the early morning hours of December 4th, he drove to the Daniels home. He broke in through a bathroom window and proceeded to the gun cabinet where he retrieved a Remington 1100 semi-automatic shotgun. He walked into Danny and Kim's bedroom and shot them both. Bryant had slept through those shots, so Jerry went into his bedroom and shot him in the head as he slept. Jessica had woken up and run into her parents' bedroom, but it was no use. Jerry walked up behind her and shot her in the back of the head. That's when he realized that Danny was still alive, so he fired 3 more times into his body. Jerry wasn't done after the murder, though. He kidnapped 3 of the children who were also in the house. It's unclear which were the Daniels' biological children and which were fosters, but Jerry took 3 young girls, leaving behind a 4-year-old boy and an infant. He took the girls from the house and he sexually assaulted one of them who was 8 years old, then dropped them off in a rural area in Bacon County. That's right, just south of Santa Claus is Bacon County. I can't make this stuff up. The girls were found by a farmer who called the police, and that triggered the discovery of the 4 bodies with the 2 unharmed children. Jerry had tossed the shotgun in a river, then went to his mother's house where he played video games and went to sleep. He was arrested only hours later and charged with 4 counts of malice murder and 3 counts of kidnapping as well as child molestation. While he was being held awaiting trial, he sawed through the bars of his cell and escaped, but was apprehended about 12 hours later. Jerry Heidler ended up getting convicted of all counts and received 4 death sentences plus 110 years in prison for the rest of the charges. His final appeal was rejected in 2024 and his eligibility for execution is confirmed. So this Christmas season, hold your family close, tell them you love them, and remain vigilant for the people who may want to do them harm. Just because it's Christmas doesn't mean the monsters aren't out there. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.